2 years ago, I went to a large shopping mall located not far from my house. It was a Saturday, and the mall was bustling with people. I spent several hours shopping, visiting various stores, and picking up items I needed. By the time I was done, it was around 4 or 5 in the evening. The mall had quieted down somewhat, but there were still plenty of people around. I left the mall and headed to the parking garage where I had parked my car on the 4th level. As I approached my vehicle, I noticed something strange. There were several photographs taped to my car. At first I was confused and had no idea who could have done this. But as I got closer, my confusion turned to shock and fear. The photographs were of me, taken that very day while I was shopping in the mall. There were about 10 photographs in total, some on the windshield and others on the side windows. Most of them appeared to be taken from a distance, but a few were quite close, as if the person had been standing just a few feet away from me. One photo in particular sent a shiver down my spine. It was taken from directly behind me, and it was clear that the person had been following me closely. My mind raced as I tried to remember if I had seen anyone suspicious while I was in the mall. But with so many people around, it would have been easy for someone to take photos without me noticing. I quickly removed the photographs from my car, feeling an overwhelming sense of paranoia. I looked around the parking garage, but there was no one in sight. Despite this, I felt like I was being watched. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine and began driving out of the parking garage. As I descended to the ground level, I noticed a car appear behind me. It was an SUV, and it was following me closely. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as I merged onto the highway, the SUV continued to follow me. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that the person in the SUV might be the one who took the photos. I tried to stay calm and kept driving, hoping they would eventually turn off. But the SUV followed me through every turn and exit. I was now convinced that I was being followed. I knew I couldn't go home and risk leading this person to my house. So, I decided to drive to the nearest police station. I didn't know the exact location off the top of my head, so I used my phone's GPS to guide me. As I followed the directions, the SUV stayed close behind. When I finally reached the street before the police station, the SUV suddenly turned off and disappeared. I felt a brief sense of relief but knew I still had to report the incident. I parked at the police station, went inside, and told the officers everything that had happened. I showed them the photographs and gave a description of the SUV, but I hadn't managed to get the license plate number or a clear view of the driver. The police took my statement and assured me they would keep an eye on the area, but there wasn't much more they could do at that moment. I drove home feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. For the next few days, I was extremely paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder and checking my surroundings. Fortunately, I wasn't followed or harassed again. A few weeks later, I even returned to the mall, but nothing unusual happened. To this day, I have no idea who took those photos or why they targeted me. It remains one of the most unsettling experiences of my life, leaving me with a deep sense of unease whenever I think about it. A few months ago, I had to get a suit tailored for an upcoming event. My wife recommended a tailor that her family had used for years, so I decided to go there after work one evening. I finished work late that day, around 8 p.m., and it was already dark outside. I entered the address into my GPS and followed the directions to an old, run-down shopping mall. The parking lot was almost empty, and the mall itself looked nearly abandoned. I double-checked the address, and it showed that the tailor was indeed inside the mall. Despite my misgivings, I got out of my car and walked into the mall. Inside, it was eerily quiet and dimly lit. Most of the stores were closed, with some of them completely emptied out, while others still had some leftover merchandise. There were only a few flickering lights illuminating the long, empty hallways. As I walked down one of the hallways, I passed by a closed clothing store. The door was slightly ajar, and as I glanced inside, I saw a man wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt. He noticed me and quickly moved out of sight. Feeling uneasy, I continued walking, looking for the tailor shop. After several minutes, I found it at the end of a hallway. It was one of the few stores still open and in business. I went inside, got my measurements taken, and thanked the tailor. I was in the shop for about 15 minutes, and during that time, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I left the tailor shop, the mall seemed even darker and more deserted. I started walking back towards the exit, retracing my steps. As I passed by the same clothing store, I saw the door was still ajar, and the same man was standing inside, staring at me. This time, his gaze felt more intense and unsettling. I decided to ignore him and keep walking. But as soon as I passed the store, I heard the door creak open and footsteps following me. My heart rate spiked, and I quickened my pace. The footsteps behind me also picked up speed. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear the man getting closer. I knew I had to get to my car as quickly as possible. I broke into a full sprint, racing through the dark hallways towards the exit. I could hear the man's footsteps pounding behind me, getting closer and closer. I burst through the exit doors and dashed across the parking lot to my car. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my keys, desperately hitting the unlock button. I threw myself into the car, slammed the door shut, and locked it just as the man reached my car. He yanked on the door handle and pounded on the window, his face twisted in frustration. I quickly started the engine and sped out of the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove away, I called the police and reported the incident, giving them a description of the man and the location. For days after the encounter, I felt a lingering sense of fear and paranoia. Every shadow and every sound made me jumpy, and I kept replaying the events in my mind. I couldn't understand why the man had followed me or what his intentions were. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Thankfully, I never saw that man again, and when I returned to the mall for my final fitting, I made sure to go during the day. The mall was still mostly empty, but the sunlight and presence of a few other people made it feel less ominous. I collected my suit without incident and left, vowing never to visit that mall alone again. I work at a small perfume store in a large shopping mall. The store is cozy, with a wide variety of perfumes and skin products displayed on elegant shelves. It's usually quiet, and I often work alone, especially during the evening shifts when the mall starts to empty out. One evening, as I was sitting behind the counter, I noticed a man wearing a creepy mask walking past the store. It wasn't quite a clown mask, but it had a grotesque, unsettling appearance. He stopped in front of the window and stared directly at me, pressing his face against the glass. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just someone playing a prank. The man stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at me. After a minute, he finally walked away. I thought that was the end of it, but about an hour later, as I was getting ready to close the store, the man returned. He walked past the store again, turned around, and came back to stand right in front of the glass doors. This time he tried to open them, but thankfully they were already locked. He pulled on the handles a few times, then stepped back and continued to stare at me through the glass. By this time it was 8 p.m. and the mall was closing. I hoped that the mall security would notice him and intervene. However, the mall was almost deserted, and the security guards were nowhere to be seen. I stayed behind the counter, pretending to be busy with closing tasks, but I kept an eye on the masked man. After a few minutes, he started pacing back and forth in front of the store. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the panic rising within me. I tried calling mall security, but there was no immediate response. The man continued to pace, occasionally stopping to peer through the glass at me. I was trapped in the store, unable to leave with him standing right outside. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a security guard appeared at the end of the hallway. I waved frantically to get his attention. He saw me, then noticed the man in the mask. The security guard approached him and began talking to him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but after a short conversation, the masked man reluctantly walked away. The security guard followed him until they were out of sight. I waited a few more minutes to make sure the coast was clear, then quickly gathered my things and locked up the store. I headed out to the parking lot, constantly looking over my shoulder. As I stepped outside, I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. To my horror, I saw the masked man standing near another set of entrance doors, about 100 feet away. He hadn't noticed me yet, so I quickly made my way to my car, trying to stay out of his line of sight. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my keys, desperately pressing the unlock button. I got into my car and locked the doors just as he started to move towards me. I started the engine and drove off as fast as I could. When I finally got home, I called the police and reported the incident. They took my statement and assured me they would keep an eye on the area. For the next few days, I was on edge, constantly looking around and feeling a lingering sense of dread. I never saw the man in the mask again, but the memory of that night still haunts me. The fear of being watched and followed left a lasting impression, making me more cautious and aware of my surroundings. When I was 10 years old, my family and I went to a large shopping mall. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and the mall was bustling with people. We had come because my younger sister wanted to see a celebrity who was having a meet and greet event. While my mom and sister waited in a long line with a crowd of excited fans, my dad, my youngest sister, and I decided to explore the mall. The center of the mall had a large amusement park and arcade, so my dad took us there to pass the time. We spent a good while playing various arcade games and having fun. After some time, I began to feel hungry, so my dad gave me some money and sent me off to get some pretzels. I walked away from the amusement area, navigating through the crowded hallways. As I made my way, I kept looking around for the pretzel stand, but had trouble finding it. I must have walked for about 5 minutes when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to see a man standing there, a stranger who I had never seen before. He had a friendly demeanor and asked me what I was doing walking around by myself. I told him I was just looking for a pretzel stand. He then offered to buy me a pretzel and asked me to come with him. Even at 10 years old, I knew better than to trust a stranger. I politely declined his offer and started to walk away, intending to head back to my parents. As I walked away, I noticed the man was following me. My heart began to race, and I quickened my pace. The crowded mall worked to my advantage. I managed to weave through the throngs of people and soon lost sight of the man. I kept moving quickly until I finally saw my dad and sister near the amusement park area. I reached them and told my dad about the strange man who had approached me. My dad's face turned serious, and he kept a watchful eye on our surroundings. We stayed together and eventually got the pretzels. All the while, my dad kept glancing around to make sure the man wasn't nearby. After we regrouped with my mom and sister, who had finished their meet and greet, we decided it was time to leave. As we made our way towards the exit, we noticed a commotion in one of the hallways. There were several police officers and a small crowd gathered around. We couldn't see exactly what was happening, but it was clear that someone was being arrested. Later that day, back at home, my parents talked about the incident. They learned from the news that there had been an attempted child abduction at the mall that day. The police had arrested a man fitting the description of the one who had approached me. It sent chills down my spine to realize how close I had come to being abducted. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude that I had trusted my instincts and walked away from the stranger. It was a stark reminder of how important it is to be cautious and aware of one's surroundings, even in seemingly safe places. As a teenager, I often went to the mall with my friends. It was a popular hangout spot for us, and we enjoyed spending our weekends there shopping, eating, and just goofing around. One particular weekend, I was at the mall with my friends Jesse, Alex, Martin, and Lisa. We had been there for a few hours, wandering through stores and chatting in the food court. It was late afternoon, and we had just finished eating and were sitting at a table in the food court, laughing and joking around. Suddenly, a woman approached our table. She looked to be in her 30s, had dark blonde hair, and wore sunglasses, which struck me as odd since we were indoors. She seemed out of place, and I immediately felt a bit uneasy. She stopped in front of our table and asked if she could speak to me. Confused, I looked at my friends, who shrugged, and then back at her. I asked her what she wanted to talk about, but she insisted that it was important and that I should follow her. Against my better judgment, my curiosity got the better of me, and I got up to follow her. She led me out of the food court and down a main hallway of the mall. I glanced back at my friends, who were watching me with puzzled expressions. As we walked, the woman didn't say much, which made me even more nervous. After a few minutes, she turned into a dimly lit corridor that branched off from the main area of the mall. The corridor was narrow, with no stores, just some storage and janitorial closets. At the far end, there was an exit sign. Halfway down the corridor, a door to one of the storage rooms opened, and 2 men stepped out. They both looked at me with unsettling expressions. Alarm bells started ringing in my head, and my gut told me that something was very wrong. I stopped walking and asked the woman what was going on. She just told me to keep following her, but her tone had changed, and it sounded more insistent and aggressive. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I turned around and started walking quickly back the way I had come. The men began to follow me, their footsteps echoing ominously in the empty corridor. My heart raced, and I broke into a run. As I reached the main hallway, I heard the woman shout after me, but I didn't look back. I sprinted back to the food court where my friends were still sitting. They saw the look of fear on my face, and I quickly explained what had happened. Without hesitation, we all decided to leave the mall immediately. As we made our way to the exit, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the woman and the two men following us, but they were nowhere in sight. We left the mall and headed to a nearby park, where we sat down and talked about what had just happened. My friends were as shocked and confused as I was. We speculated about what the woman and the two men might have wanted, but we couldn't come up with any reasonable explanations. Later that evening, as we were heading home, we saw the woman again. She was walking down the street, but this time she was alone. She didn't seem to notice us, and we quickly turned the corner to avoid her. The encounter left us all feeling uneasy and paranoid. To this day, the memory of that incident sends chills down my spine. I'm grateful that I trusted my instincts and got out of there before anything could happen. It served as a harsh reminder of the importance of being aware of your surroundings and not blindly trusting strangers, even in a familiar place like a shopping mall. Friends, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. It will help the channel grow.